I
So
look forward to it.
yeah, I decided, so I'll just go ahead and start my spiel. But essentially, I thought that Fireside Chat sounded really more fun than doing one more webinar. So we do there's a lot of places where you can get education and all that stuff. I wanted people to be able to come to a place where they can be like, here's two experts that are talking about one topic, and it's not sort of this chaotic, right? Like panel sort of conversation.
Yep.
It's a conversation that people can chime in and ask questions and like really be more enriching. And sure, there will be a slide or two right here or there, but the goal is not to see slides until we die. It's a slide for helpfulness and then we move on, right?
Right.
And so Suzanne is my first one, and I'm so glad to I'm so glad to try this out. But we're gonna do this every month. I've committed to doing them once a month.
Good.
On the second Wednesday through the rest of the year, at the same time, same place. And hopefully, people find it interesting.
Got it from someone who said she can't figure out how to join our event.
Do you want to just
I'm gonna find LinkedIn here. I think I have it open. Maybe, maybe not.
Well, while she's taking care of that, Mitch, you and I don't know each other quite yet, but I'm Chanaye. And yeah, I'm based in Mexico currently. So you're going to see me with a handkerchief because I am very warm. But I used to live in Atlanta. So
Okay.
I moved there about 5 months. But I am originally from the Northwest. So a Washingtonian through and through. But
So how'd you end up in Mexico?
long the long and the short of it was I was very, very tired of Atlanta and figured out, and a friend was like, why don't you come to Mexico? And I was like, that sounds like a cool idea. Here I am.
That's great. I like that. The ability to just pick up and run and go somewhere different.
Literally picked up and ran away. So I know you know Suzanne, but I'm going to introduce her at least a little bit anyway. Suzanne Allen is the president of Allen CFO Services since 2020, and she believes in the effective financial management is the cornerstone of any successful business. And she's about not just balancing the books and crunching numbers, it's about transformation and transforming the business. So her powers are in organizing, helping businesses uncover patterns and trends that drive their profitability and foster their accountability and drive ownership. And her passion is for operational excellence, which is one of mine as well, and fostering team engagement, which makes her a trusted and impactful leader and trusted advisor. Yeah.
Great. I know that Suzanne and I are also in one group together, a fractional group with Rick Marr.
Oh yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. I wind up making his Friday, Thursday and Friday meeting because they conflict with other meetings on my list, but they're really very helpful. So
yeah, especially for someone like me who's trying to break into working for themselves, which is a new thing for me. So I've made some really, really great connections, and I've seen Suzanne's work through your postings and through Rick himself. So
awesome.
What I've seen.
So then us talking about churn and retention is probably a really good subject matter for you as a
For me being an HR person, yeah. I mean, it's rough. It's all about leadership and doing it right.
It's all about leadership for sure. Yeah. So today we're talking about churn and retention. We'll go through definitions. We'll do some little bit about case studies and then essentially chime in wherever you want. Mitch, you can,
Okay.
this is a conversation with you too. So that's kind of the nice part when we're nice and small.
There, I just sent her the link, so she should be coming in shortly.
Love it.
So, her name is Stacy Cloney, and she's a huge networker. So she's going to be a good person for you to meet as well, Mitch.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, she's really accomplished. So, so do I need to introduce you, Chanaye?
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, so Chanaye and I have been working to put together the Fireside Chat, her brainchild, and it's been really fun to work with her. We do have a lot in common. You know, she's dynamic, she's an entrepreneur, she loves to transform business operations and processes, always looking for profitability and efficiency, which speaks to the CFO, right? So she really looks for improvement and has a passion, and she does have a passion for the future and works to optimize processes so that people understand what they need to do. You know, when people understand what they need to do when they come to work and they understand
Yep.
the operation and the process and where they fit, that's huge. So between my love of metrics and her passion for you know, making sure everyone has a good roadmap, we're a good team. You know, if you look
Yeah.
at the enterprise operating system traction, so if you're new to fractional, Mitch, you might be hearing something about that, but the book is called Traction, and they always talk about, yeah, they always talk about everybody has a number. And so what we're zeroing in on today is churn and retention, and which should you focus on and why, all that good stuff. So
I'm looking forward to it.
So why don't we start at the beginning? Do you want to take this away? What's churn? What's the definition?
oh wow. I'm just, sorry. So I was just looking at my last text from Stacy. Let me just give me a second to make sure she got my email. I think she did. I sent her the Zoom. Okay. So what is churn? Well, if you are in an industry, well, really it can be service or product related. But churn is going to be the customers that leave your business for whatever reason. So they stop using your services, your product. So they're the customers you lost, which is kind of a negative way to think about it, but there is some use to thinking about churn, because if you're measuring it, you can be thinking about, well, why did they leave? And the other piece of it is, are these customers that are going to help us because they left? And that's where really understanding the metrics and how they play in is really helpful, because they could be customers that leave and they're super profitable, and they could be customers that leave that are not super profitable. So the ability to do some analysis of who left and why, it can also give you some ideas on things that you need to enhance with your product or service as well. Anything you want to add to that, Chanaye?
Yeah, I mean, we talked a this, to be honest, this is the thing that got us talking about, hey, maybe you and I should like join up for this conversation, because we were really talking about how churn really is a voting with our feet, right? So, you know, like why they're leaving for good reasons, right? Like hopefully, right? They're like, we found it's necessary for us to move on. Your solution doesn't match what we need anymore. We're bigger, right? We're smaller perhaps. But then we're also signifying when they leave for bad reasons, being very like good versus bad. when they leave for bad reasons, it's saying, oh, we're not doing something quote unquote quite right. There's an opportunity for change.
Right. And of course, there is a formula if you love formulas. Basically, and I do, but basically the customers at the start of a period less the customers at the end of the period. And then you divide that by the customers at the start and you come up with your churn rate. And it's a smart thing to measure. But it, and it can tell you some things. But I know when we were originally talking about it, it's like, it just sounds so negative. It just sounds so bad. But
It does,
it is
but
useful. Yeah.
useful, right? I mean, you may not in the moment really think or understand how many people are churning out. And once you run, I mean, that's why we have data, right? That's why we do an analysis. And then from that, you figure out, was it good churn or was it bad? And if it's
Well,
bad, how do I control it?
another way to think about it in your line of work is employees churn off, right? Hi, Stacy. Welcome. But employees churn. So why did they churn? Why did they leave? You do the exit interview. You try to get to the bottom of it. And the reality is some you don't want to leave at all, and some you figure, well, oh, okay, we'll accept that and move on. So we just started, Stacy, discussing the what churn is and how to think about churn, how to measure it. So if you want the formula, we've got one.
Okay.
um,
I'll share it with you so you can hear with it.
You can throw it back up.
Yeah. But it's really a way to measure the customers that are leaving you, and you can use that to inform, going forward decisions and also profitability. If you're churning off customers that are profitable, that sends you a message that you need to dig in and see what's going on and what's really going on. So
why in your opinion, and maybe for y'all too, Mitch and CC, like why do you think people would churn off? That's for a more negative reason. People that theoretically should stay with you, but they're leaving. What have you guys?
Yeah, customer service is one of those ubiquitous kinds of things that, if you call and try to do a follow-up survey, they'll talk about customer service as a potential issue. They couldn't get answers to their questions. Maybe depending on the industry you're in, maybe their bill is always wrong. I used to work in wireless, and so that was one that would come through often. You don't have all my payments posted.
Right.
And so once you dig into that and you see, well, no, we don't, because you haven't paid us. There's ways to learn from that and be smarter for that. And back when I worked in wireless, if you got mad at your carrier, you could walk across the street and change carriers very easily and very quickly. So people wanted to know why they were leaving. Is it the service? Is it, I mean, that's a industry specific, but is it the service? Is it the tower range? Are people dropping calls all the time? So those are really good examples.
Yeah. Mine's similar to yours. It's like inconsistency with like expected output. So it's customer service, but like kind of what you just said, and when I think that it's sort of like my internet service at my house, right? I think it's supposed to be the same most day, all day and all night. And then I end up not being able to have my calls at my house because of it, right? Because it's so the inconsistency of it, I think allows for me to be like, and which is also why I'm having another conversation about, okay, so how do I switch providers and where do I go to do that? And this is not necessarily a customer service thing, right? It's how can I get the most consistent outcomes? And that is in itself a hallmark of churn.
Yep. That's a great point. So Stacy, one of the reasons we decided to have this little fireside chat is Chanaye and I were having a one-to-one, and we started talking about churn, and really had a fun and dynamic conversation. We thought it would be fun to share it with others. So feel free to chime in if you have questions or want to make some comments as well from your experience.
Well, I will make a couple comments. Only Suzanne knows me. I had been in the restaurant business for 3 decades. So I am very familiar with churn, and I'm very familiar with the churn that I was happy to have and the churn I was disappointed to have. It was in a very competitive market. We were stealing chefs, general managers all the time and wooing them with bonuses. And then the next guy would woo them with a car. I mean, literally a BMW car to get that general manager. So I'm very experienced in it, but now since 2008, when my career changed, I can share that I broker payroll and merchant services, 2 highly competitive services. And it's usually poor customer service in the payroll field. Every time I call Stacy, I get somebody new. And when I broker it, and I'm just because I don't think I'll offend anyone, let's say they're with ADP because everybody knows ADP.
Yep.
I'm as candid as I can be. That probably will happen if I take you to Paycor or Connect, etc., because it's such a competitive, high turnover sales market that many of the salespeople leave and hop. So we try to align them with people. And when I broker, I try to align them with people that have been there for at least 5 years because they tend to stay. But my point there is it is oftentimes customer service, but the other part of it is they outgrow their provider. And that too happens in merchant services and payroll. When you start what you needed and what you had, they outgrow it, and now they need different software. And the big guys out there, QuickBooks, they're always trying to keep sticky. We can do your invoices, we can do your payments, we can do your payroll, etc. But when some of those add on all those additions, that again is where customer service sometimes falls in worker comp issues or garnishment wage issues, because they're trying to be all things where you really need an HR expert or someone with your tax help. So in my world, which helps me keep gainfully employed when people want to be brokered, customer service is usually one that I hear very frequently, or they've outgrown their service. Or the other one is they don't know what they don't know, similar to what you were saying. Now I have to go shop my Wi-Fi. And so if they want to work with a broker, I can show them a whole array of things that they can get. And some of them they didn't know even existed, but they don't need all of that. So why pay for all of that? You just want your Wi-Fi to work when you turn on your computer. I don't need all this other stuff. So those are some of the things that I hear in my day-to-day transactions with clients.
I love that because actually I was just talking to somebody where churn also happens because there are too many features available. So yeah, there's like an over ability to consume that doesn't have enough. You're not good enough at a lot of stuff. And at one, you're not like you have too many, your suite of offerings is too wide, but you're not great at 2 or 3 of them. You have 15 that you're offering to the world, which often will go back into sort of like why people churn on the more negative side, which is customer service or inconsistency. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and in my world of HR, it's so many components. It can be compensation could be an issue. It could be employee relations issues. It can be leadership. And when I mean that, it means a negative. It can be that there's no growth within the organization. It can be for so many different reasons that you're going to lose employees. And sometimes, that churn is not a bad thing because as much as we would have liked the person to stay and they're great at what they do, their mobility was really limited. So, and the same thing goes for me when I think of my own clients. I've got some that I churn because they're more transactional. Their needs are very transactional.
Yeah.
So I have to be careful. Like when I do my own analysis, and if I look and I see what my churn rate is, And then I say, okay, let me go in and look at this number. Well, these 4 were project-based. Those others, the other 7 or 8, are long-term relationships. So while the numbers could look off, as long as you know why, you can kind of manage better. But from an HR perspective, there are so many components of why people leave, I should say churn.
I think
Yeah.
that
I love what
the
you just said.
placement, don't you think sometimes it's like they're in HR, it's their interim until they find what they were really seeking. So sometimes there's that churn. In my world, you start with Square, you never go back to Square. You outgrow Square. In payroll, they outgrow payroll providers, or now we are going to offer benefits and 401k, and you're with Gusto, they don't have the 401k support. So I think sometimes what you purchase or where you place yourself to be employed is just that placement until that next need or what you are seeking appears.
Or it can be for any one of us, right? It can be about cost.
Yeah.
I can do the same thing somewhere else at a lower price. And that may excite someone like, a CFO or a CEO, but price isn't always the greatest barometer of whether or not to move from the service that you currently have.
Right.
I think you hit that on the head for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Stacy Mitch is newer, I should say, to the fractional space. So fun to hear his perspective on these, churn and retention. They apply to so many things. So it's fun to sort of insert the HR aspect of this as well. So
yeah, I think what's I'm being fascinating is, that you brought up that perfect word of transactional. Like sometimes the relationship that you had with that particular client is completely transactional, and you are absolutely replaceable if you don't come up with the right price, right?
Yeah.
And so, and that's in my head, like, is that a churn issue? Is that a retention issue, right? Because with my clients, I always think about, do we want to keep, like, who do we want to work with? Like, do we want to have more transactional relationships where it's all, in some cases, right? If it's about money, particularly, it's a race to the bottom, right? How can they get a lot for nothing? Or is it about retaining those clients that even though we've cycled on and off, I'm retaining them for years and we're having conversations for ever, right? Like there's a client I'm working with right now. We're on year number 2. So like, and she's not been paying me for 2 years, right? We've cycled on and off for things that needed to get done. But I would consider that to be a retention metric because she's paid me for a 6-month period, and then we cycle off for 6 months, and then we come back on for 3 months, then we cycle back off for another period of time. So
yeah, definitely retention.
which I think is a good segue to retention. Talk about retention.
I was thinking that might be a good segue to retention. So do you want to talk about what that is?
No, I think you should talk about retention too.
All right. Basically, it's the percentage of customers who stick with you. I mean, at the end of the day, that's what retention is. Who is staying, which is a much more positive way to think about it. But as we said, churn has its uses, and it is a useful metric and statistic. And especially if you start, we've got some complementary metrics as well, but if you start running all these things and look at it, you're going to see where you can start to get a good picture of who your customer base is. So who's staying with you? Why are they staying? What's the overall profitability of who's staying with you? It could be that they're very profitable. It could be that they're not.
Right.
So you're getting a message through retention that says, uh-oh, we've got to figure this out. And you can't save your way to prosperity, but if something's upside down in the pricing and profitability, you got to think of a path through that somehow.
Mm-hmm.
And so I mean, yes, there's a formula. The customers at the end of the period, less new customers, divided by the customers at the start of the period tells you who you hung on to for the, that period of time. Um, so that's okay. Shanaye is back. For a minute, I thought I lost you. I saw the screen flash something.
Sorry. I have better internet, I promise.
Yeah, you do, and you've got beautiful vegetation, and I have fake plants. So
yeah, I wonder, when we think more about retention rate, I think that everybody has had lots of vibes. Stacey, you were telling me about your very cutthroat life in the restaurant industry before, right? So when we think about our lives and like I used to work in education, and so one of the places that and I was working specifically in an after school program, and they kept saying inside of the annual report, their question was, is they were like, oh, we retain, 97% of our students, and 99% of those students go on to graduate high school. This was a 6th through 12th grade after school program. And it was really fascinating because, bad data in gets bad data out. And so I spent like about 3 weeks of my time being like, where did you guys get that number from? Right? There's like 97 and 94% retention rate for 6th through 12th graders. It was a crazy number. I had no idea where it went. And it was so interesting to go through and like track through time, like choosing one kid and being like, okay, they were supposed to be in 6th grade at this point, and they're supposed to be in 11th grade right now. Did I retain them through these 5 years, right? And how? And then at what point are kids dropping off? And I think that it's similar when we're having conversations about clients, companies, and the customers that they're serving as well. Like, where did they drop off? How long is our customer retention over, like, just truly over time?
yeah, I think that's a really good point. But just like churn, you can really dig into those ratios and come up with all kinds of new looks at why people are staying with. And they may feel you may be very competitive, and so they stay because they like the service. So you can really go through and figure that out. You could also have low profit margins, so you've got all these people staying with you because you're cheap. And
I was just going to say that. And
Yep.
it could be people that are using your services at such a quantity that it's really not profitable for you to keep them as a client.
Right.
And then
Right.
that's where you have to make those hard decisions to say, am I going to personally churn that client out? Because, they're consuming, let's say, a full day per week of my time. And
Right.
that's just killing me because I'm not able to get to the other clients as much that
Yeah.
are profitable.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And there's, you think about some of the different industries. So Stacy, with her food background, I was in grocery wholesaling and retailing at one point. So the whole purpose was volume and low profitability. So depending on the industry, if you can get your volume up there, that may be your niche. That may be how you handle it. You don't make as much money, but you sell more products, or if it happens,
Right.
I don't know how you do that in a service business per se, but
It's a
that can be,
it's a very valid point though, because I can
yeah,
speak specifically. I don't know what coast everyone's from, but I was part of Target, which we competed with Walmart and Costco. I was there for 18 years and it was Marshall Fields, Dayton's, blah, blah, blah. But we got the better pricing for the restaurants for Coca-Cola. We would put it out to contract every year. We Coke or Pepsi. And whenever you switched, it was hell, but we'd put it out to contract. Now in my new world of helping a startup restaurant, they are paying not double, but way more for Coke. The small business is paying more. So that volume, that's where the discount comes. And that's the exact same thing in processing. When I meet somebody who is processing, let's just throw a number of $10,000 or less a month, They're comfortable with the flat fee. They pay a little bit more, but they're only processing $10,000 a month. They start processing 10, 20, 30, $100,000 a month. I bring them in on basis points. It's a substantial savings, but nobody, they go to Square and PayPal to start because no one's going to give them those great basis points. And that it's backwards, but it's not.
Right.
Because the big guys are, the big hitters are really making the purchase. But where it hurts my business and I will have churn, if I have a little, and speaking specifically, I have a little co-op in a small little town that competes with Trader Joe's or Aldi's, if anyone knows Aldi's, and it has a higher turnover. They can't price their food to match it. They have to thrive on local, and local doesn't want the co-op to close, but I got to go to Aldi's to get my eggs because your eggs are too expensive. It's just really a tricky business. But volume can cover a lot. I was going to say sins. That's the wrong. Volume can give you sustainability for a long time. And in my industry too, if the co-op decides not to take credit card processing anymore because it's costing 3% to their business, I get it because they're just trying to make payroll.
Yep.
Yeah.
And sometimes
it's
sometimes 3% is exactly what they needed to be able to comfortably make payroll. It's actually said something really interesting in that as well is I can't go to your co-op eggs, but I can go to Aldi's because it's a better price. I feel like also when we're thinking about retention, we're also looking at retention because of what, right? Because of what reason, right? So, and we're getting a doubling down. So I'm finding, at least in my business, that my lower price ticket items, people don't stick around for a longer term, but when somebody shells out a little bit higher and spends more time with me, then that's the reason. My client that I was talking about earlier, that 2-year client, she paid at my highest ticket, right? And we've established a huge relationship. The gains and the overall net change in her business was so large that I can tell that for that service she felt like she was getting, like, her time and money was worth it, right? Versus perhaps somebody who's paying a little bit less. It's like, oh, I could have got that probably somewhere else, or I could have done a little something different. So I'm noticing also that there's a retention rate depending on service and depending on how I'm feeling. Like, do I want to improve my retention rates for those smaller offers compared to my larger ones? Are you guys seeing anything similar, or any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I kind of have, if I think about, one of my clients in particular, I've been there 6 months with them. And from a volume perspective, if I think about it in those terms, I'm, not charging them as much as I would charge somebody else. It's more project based and it's more transactional. This one I was able to price a little bit lower because I knew that if I did my job right, I could stay on board with them and provide them with good service over a longer period of time. And then ultimately, the end revenue for me would be higher. Whereas I had another client that I had to walk away from who wanted me, and I looked at their total budget and I said, 3/4 of your budget is going towards advertising. And it's gonna take significant amount of hours, and you're only gonna pay me $500, and I can't do that. So yeah, I do have that, and I see that with other clients as well.
I speak from my customers. Sometimes they sell themselves short, and I use the terminology loss leaders. Their loss leaders are not generating enough traffic. And so they are operating at a loss all the time. Because my gamut of my clients are from the guy who puts your dock in to your lawn care, little cafes, cookie shops, etc. And sometimes they get caught with, I've got to market this low price. But if that's all you're marketing and you're not generating sales, those loss leaders or undercutting your rate, man, if you need to make $95 an hour as a fractional to pay your medical insurance and your mortgage, etc., I personally think you have no right billing yourself at 50 an hour just to have a job. You can't afford that. And I think some solo and entrepreneurs or business owners that have a great talent sometimes undersell themselves because they don't have enough on the books, enough billable hours. But I don't think that should always be the reason to offer a loss leader or a special or a promo or something free, because that doesn't pay the mortgage either.
No, you're right.
Yeah. Right.
I
Great
agree with
point.
you.
When I worked in the film industry, there's you make more, there's your labor costs and then there's your equipment costs. So if you have equipment that you bring on set, you make significantly more money, just period. And however, you would have to like make some thinking about what you just said. I'd have to think a little bit further about like, okay, so what kind of production is it? Is it one where they're going to throw my equipment around and I'm walking around with 50, 60, $70,000 equipment, and then I know they don't have good insurance, so I'm going to have to fight with the insurance to, if something gets broken, like, is it enough money for all of that to be worth it? And 9 times out of 10, it's not. So when you're when you're marketing yourself at, when you should be marketing yourself at 95, but you're like 50's fine, sometimes just the money is not worth the hassle.
Right.
Yep. Spot on.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Chanaye.
No, I was going to say something different. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say the whole Aldi thing. It brought me back to a presentation I was part of. It was a Dutch strategy expert, and he talked about how Aldi has mastered the low cost. And so he basically said that quarter that you put in for your shopping cart, that all by itself is the reason nobody's running around Aldi parking lots picking up shopping carts, because everybody wants their quarter back, or they pay it forward, what have you, give it to somebody else.
Yeah.
And then they don't stock the shelves. They just open a box, put a slat in it, and shove it up there. And that, so they really keep their staffing at a minimum. And if you think about your typical US grocery store, your neighborhood grocery store type thing, there's people in the meat department and produce and, all at baking, deli. There's all these departments, not to mention all the stocking that gets done. So just the labor alone, they're at a different price point.
Right.
So they're really retaining that low cost customer that doesn't care what it looks like when they come in the store. They just want decent food inexpensively, and they don't care that they have to go get their own cart and put it back. So.
And if anything, it's like, I believe that most times people are trying to be charitable. So let me just give you my quarter. Here, just go ahead and take it, right? Because they're doing me a favor by taking the cart.
Right, exactly.
And I would rather pay the 25 cents.
Yep. Yeah, there's plenty of that too. But again, nobody from Aldi is out brokering those deals.
Correct. And they're smart about that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's a model that works for them.
It works beautifully for them. Yeah.
And, they, don't have to do anything elaborate in the way of, putting up big signs and fancy things. It's just basic.
Right.
And people will put that and say, okay, basic means I can get good value and I'll continue to go there. And I don't care that I'm pulling my grapes out of a box rather than off of a nice shelf.
That's right. Or that they've not been misted.
Right.
with the thunder. Don't forget the thunder and the mist coming down.
Yeah. Speaking of mist, Chanaye could probably use some right now.
I'm almost done with my smoothie and I'm ready. Otra vez, por favor. Let's talk about the complementary metrics that you had you wanted to share with us.
Yeah.
Those up now.
So some of the complementary metrics, you talk about retention and churn, but Also, as a component of that, the customer lifetime value. So you're really looking at what they're buying from you, and then dividing the churn rate into that, or what your customers are buying from you as a whole, and dividing the churn rate into that. And you come up with a general number for customer lifetime value. You can also do that. Well, I think you can do it both ways. You can do it for sort of your whole customer base, or for just a single customer. And in some industries, like marketing, for example, that customer lifetime value is huge. They want to know how long they've had the customer, how long have they retained them, and then what have they earned over the life of that relationship. So that's really taking a look at retention and putting a sort of a deeper microscope to it, and trying to make sure that you really understand what you're making on that customer and whether they're profitable. Another one is customer acquisition costs. So again, going back to my wireless roots, especially, this was huge, and the analysts tracked it all the time. But it's really important. I mean, I've got clients in marketing, and I ask them to track it, because it can be really easy to sort of lose track of what it costs to get a customer. So you take a look at what your total sales and marketing expenses are, and then you divide that by your number of new customers. And that's going to tell you what you're spending. And when you track it over time, you see trends. And that's where, anytime you're doing metrics, if you can get trends to emerge, that's a great situation to be in. Another one is, how much revenue have you lost due to churn customers? And we talked about that a little bit when we were talking about churn. How much revenue have you lost? And also, how much profit have you lost? Those are both really important things. And if you look at both of them, you might be losing a whole bunch of revenue and not losing a bunch of profit. And I can recall a very wise CFO from early in my career who basically said, sometimes you have to get smaller to get better, which is really an interesting thing to think about. So your revenue, your top line is going to be worse, but your bottom line might actually shore up. And then the last one is,
and I just want to go back to that point, and you're absolutely right, because you do see a lot of your revenue churn rate about what you've lost you have to get smaller. But I think some of the companies that I've been involved in, and a good example is American Express. They were into publishing, which was not a main part of their business. They were into catalog sales. So they had, a bunch of different even they owned Lehman Brothers at one point. So they wanted to be everything to everyone, when in reality, their biggest source of revenue came from the American Express cards and from travel related services. So they realized to be the grocery store of credit cards was not a good idea. So they spun off all of those other businesses other than the ones. So they got smaller. So instead, they could send their clients to anywhere else to manage their funds and their money. And they didn't need magazines or catalog sales. And they became more profitable.
Yeah. And the CFO who said that was back when I was working in the grocery wholesale and retail. And it was not uncommon for the wholesaler to make loans to the retailer. And is a wholesaler a bank? No, but they were making loans. So now they're taking their capital and they're sending it to their customers, in the hopes that the customers will continue to order groceries at profitable margins. And two guesses were, sometimes it worked. Sometimes it worked and they got stronger and they were able to pay back the loans and it was all good. Not always. And so that's where it really came down to, even some of the retail stores they owned. Do we have to get smaller to get better? Because those retail stores, like we talked earlier, a lot of staff, really low margins. So yeah, great point. Anyone else have something they want to share on that?
Well, coming from corporate America, when I heard you have to get smaller to get better, my husband is also in a very large corporation. I've been in very large corporations, and we'd get top heavy. And you go through it, it was almost like you could set your watch to about every 2, 3 years it was coming, and then the layoffs would come, and we'd get leaner at one company I was with, get leaner to be meaner and capture more of it. And it usually worked in the favor, but it sure is scary times when, I just opened a restaurant. Now I go lay half of them off because we were trying to get leaner.
Yeah.
But we did get top heavy, and workloads started to get out of hand, and then you'd reshuffle and resort the deck, and it invested in my 401k. So, and I was part of a layoff. I didn't make the cut in 2008, so I wasn't always, you make some, you don't make some. My husband was with the place for many, many years, and it's like, I don't know if I'll make this one or not. You just never know, but it seems to be in the press today with the federal government, and not political. We've all worked or read. That is how corporate America works. You sometimes get too top heavy, too compartments, too many compartments.
Siloed,
So, yeah. So it does need to happen, just like a forest needs to burn down at some point to be healthy again.
And it's
But it's
all,
painful.
yeah, it's painful, but in a lot of ways, it's how you do it, right? Working in an investment bank for a while, that exactly happened. We felt like every 8, 9 months, we were letting people go. But the way and the manner in which you do it can help in the long term with your clients, right? If you do it in a haphazard way and it appears to be, I'll use Meta, right? They just let a whole lot of people go. And it's because of a shift in their business, but then they throw out the caveat, well, these were all underperformers. Well, not all of them. And now you've just blanketed every single person that is leaving Meta, not of their own accord, as being a bad performer. And how do they deal and recover from that? So I think really, when you think about churn and you think about retention, it's about how do you handle those difficult scenarios, whether it's about having to raise costs, having to let people go. It's about how do you do it in a way that shows respect and humanity so that, your clients understand that you're doing something to survive, keep your business afloat, and you're trying to do it in a very professional manner.
Right. So the last complementary metric that we have is just revenue that you've retained, including upsells and cross sells to your clients, divided by starting revenue. So how have you been growing and expanding those relationships? And those are really powerful metrics as well. So I don't know, Chanaye, anything you want to add on that?
I think I'm finding, at least right now with the clients I'm working with, is I'm finding that they're the most successful when they have figured out in marketing. They talk about the customer journey, right? Like, how does a customer go from they don't know you to they know you now, and like getting into the business. I use the same phrase, like customer journey. Like, how do they get from they started with you into they're going for the long haul, however long haul means to you. And so I think especially this is the core of my work is about how can we retain people for as long as possible. And a lot of it being how can we upsell, cross sell, maybe even downsell, right? So that we're still meeting them at their need that they're needing, that's necessary for them at this moment, but then also keeping them for a longer term, right? Like, like, and especially when we like them. I think that's also probably a something I want to talk about at another point, maybe another fireside chat. How do we decide how do we decide that we want to keep that client, right? How do we decide that client is somebody who needs to stick around our business for the long term? And because not everybody does.
Agreed.
Yeah. And of course, the CFO says it's all in the numbers, but you raise a good point. Not necessarily. So.
Yeah. Well, I think that is it for us today. Y'all have been fantastic.
Yes.
This has been really, really good. Thank you. Thank y'all for coming. Thank you for
I've enjoyed it.
This has been awesome. Suzanne and I have put together 2 different resources from our resource vaults. So she has a KPI toolkit, and then I have a customer lifetime value workbook and calculator. So y'all are going to get a copy of this replay. You'll get a copy of these slides. You'll get a copy of the links to be able to download those if you would like. And also too, if you want to get a hold of Suzanne or I, we always around. You can always find us.